And so what I'm going to be talking to you about a little bit is, I'm really talking to you about what are called the 1967 occupied territories. And before I start, I want to be really clear. A lot of people will say that the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is really about the 1967 territories, but I think it's really important to understand that all of Palestine is under occupation, as our other speakers will mention. So one of the things that I think it's really important when we're talking, particularly when we're dealing with sort of audiences that are somewhat hostile, is there's always this notion of, well, Palestinians aren't ready for peace. They don't seriously negotiate for peace. But one of the things that I think is really important to understand is that Palestinians have basically suffered under a continuous process of expansion. There's never been an Israeli withdrawal from Palestinian land. There's been a withdrawal from Egypt, but there's never been a withdrawal from Palestinian territory. I like to start with this map, which really shows the beginning of the problem. This is a map by Gershon Shafir, who's an Israeli academic. And he sort of paints a picture for what Palestine looked like in 1880 at the beginning of what's called the first Aliyah, the first migration of colonizing European Jews to the Middle East. And you can see on this map, these red areas are the very first settlements. By 1918, you can see there's already been quite a bit of expansion of Zionist colonization in Palestine. Then you started seeing the Europeans get involved and start really carving up Palestine into chunks. You can see here the sort of olive-colored area would be the proposed Palestinian state, and this purple area would be the proposed Jewish state. Again, now, this map doesn't represent the actual demographics. It's essentially a huge giveaway to the Jewish colonists. But even so, certainly more equitable than what came after. On the left side, you can see a map from 1947, which was the UN Proposition 181, the UN Resolution 181, which was the international community's decision of how the territory should be divided. And it's really about 50-50. It's about 50% territory for a Jewish state and 50% territory for an Arab state. But if you look on the right side, then you see what actually happened. And by 1949, you see that the Arab state, which is in tan, has shrunk a great deal. In fact, about 22% of land is left to a future Palestinian state, the rest being given to the Jewish state. So how did this happen? And it happened through this process of what Israeli writer Ilan Pappé calls the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. So over 500 villages destroyed both by proto-military militias. So essentially before the Israeli state was formed, they were already cleansing Arab and Palestinian towns, and then by the IDF, by the Israeli military itself, engaged in these raising and depopulation campaigns. So this is where you see, first of all, the formation of the Palestinian refugee problem, but also the geographical contraction of what could ever be a Palestinian state, according to Israel, and really what's been agreed to by UN Resolution 242. But of course, this expansion didn't stop in 1967. It's continued ever since. In 1967, the Israelis got control of the West Bank and Gaza. And then what ended up happening is the next time there were major international negotiations were the Oslo Accords, which were hailed internationally as a real step forward towards peace. But if you see what happened here, the Oslo Accords were an interim accords. They were designed to basically say this is a step towards an eventual peace, an eventual Palestinian state. But even this 22% of historic Palestine that is the West Bank and Gaza, even that was carved up even further. You can see this blue area is what's called Area C, and the Israeli military essentially uses this as de facto Israeli territory. So Palestinian villages that are in Area C can't get permits. Palestinian villages in Area C often get bulldozed. They're the targets of serious military campaigns on a regular basis. And so that's 60% of the West Bank. Is in Area C. Additionally, you have Area B, which is what's called so-called joint responsibility between the Palestinians and the Israelis, which of course also means further expansion for Israeli settlements. And then Area A are the little islands that you see, Jenin, Nablus, the major population centers for Palestinians on the West Bank, which are getting further and further isolated. And you can see when we talk about expansion, then what's happening. This is actually a map from 2002, and I can tell you the settlements have expanded exponentially since this time. But one of the things I'd like to put your attention to is you can see the dark blue. The dark blue are settlements. And this is, again, as far back as 2002. And then if you look on the eastern side of the West Bank, there's this huge swath of blue, which is the Jordan Valley closure zone. And this is a closure for Palestinians only. Settlers are certainly allowed into this area. But there's a huge amount of settlement expansion that's happening now, and in the past 5 years has been ramped up. In addition to sort of this large-scale contraction of Palestinian territory, I like to show you this map from the Qalqilya municipality, which is close to the Green Line. And you can see these different colors are showing you how the city of Qalqilya is actually contracted based on the expansion of Israeli control. So the dark tan, the largest area, was the area of Qalqilya before 1948. Then what's called the Green Line was made, which divided Qalqilya, put it in the West Bank and most of its land into the Israeli state. And then you can see the wall in red, so that's cut off quite a bit more territory. And what's important to note about this is most of the farmland, most of the wells for Qalqilya are in the 1948 territories. So when that Green Line was formed, it really cut off farmers from their land and cut off water, which is, of course, an incredibly valuable resource in the area. So now, under the Israeli administration, Qalqilya is allowed to be in this little green box. That's what's under the control of the Qalqilya municipality now. And the rest of it is Area C, so essentially under control of the Israeli military. To give us an understanding of where and why these settlements are occurring, this is another map from the Qalqilya municipality, and it shows you the different water resources on the West Bank. And if we look, Qalqilya is in the Western Basin. It's a town on the western side of the West Bank. And you can see how under the Oslo Agreement, the water has been divided between the different groups. So the Western Basin is the largest aquifer in the West Bank. It's actually extremely prolific and productive. 362 million cubic meters of water produced per year without the aquifer suffering and going down in level. Under Oslo, there's the generous proportion of 22 million cubic meters of water a year for Palestinians and 340 million cubic meters of water for the Israelis. Now, keep in mind, Palestinians aren't even allowed to get this 22 million cubic meters. The new equipment is always banned. There's a long permit process for the Qalqilya municipality to get new wells or to even repair the wells that are in place. So what's happened is, even in the past 10 years, there's been a sort of a contraction of the number of wells and the amount of water that can be produced. And again, the Israeli side is producing more and more. So, oftentimes, I think when we bring up the BDS discussion, there's this notion of, well, there's this comparison with apartheid, and I think it's really important for us to have some good basis for understanding what this comparison is. So, how does Israeli apartheid work? First of all, when we talk about settlements, keeping in mind that settlements are Jewish only. These are essentially racialized colonies. They're Jewish-only settlements. Palestinians are not allowed to own land or buy homes in this territory, and more so, they're not even allowed to work there. There's a military court system, and what ends up happening is there's actually two separate legal systems in Palestine. There's one for Jews who live on the West Bank, and there's one for Palestinians who live on the West Bank. So you actually are put through an entirely different legal system depending entirely on your ethnicity. Finally, there's questions of labor. So there's the labor protections for Palestinians who do get the opportunity to work in the 48 territories are minimal, if existent at all. And there's a very complicated permit system for Palestinians to even be allowed to work in 1948. And the reason that you have so many Palestinians trying to work in 1948 is because of this massive process of economic strangulation, where it's almost impossible to start a new industry on the West Bank. Anything that requires importation of products, anything that requires any kind of outside intervention is often blocked, and materials and goods are stopped at the checkpoint, both going in and going out. So when we talk about, particularly in academia, people are saying there's this sort of attack on academic freedom and there's this attack on the economic freedom of the Israelis. It's really important to understand there is already a boycott of Palestine. And that boycott is being put in place by the Israelis and supported by the international community. Because I'm a geographer, I like to look at how occupation changes over space. And basically, I want to talk about 5 major models of occupation. Firstly, and perhaps one of the most dramatic forms of occupation is Al-Khalil, which is Hebron. which I would call a vertical occupation. So this is where the occupation actually occurs in layers, like a layer cake. Jerusalem is modeled after Hebron or Al-Khalil, where you have this house-to-house takeover. It's not large contiguous settlements, it's actually settlers going into Arab villages and into Palestinian neighborhoods and taking over house by house, if that's in the old city or some of the areas around it. Qalqilia is an example of a lateral occupation. This is sort of what I would say the conventional notion of occupation, where settlements are built around Palestinian towns and they expand further and further, dispossessing Palestinians of land. And then the villages that are in the way of this expansion go through these processes of collective punishment, like closures of the entire village to entry from the outside. Jordan Valley, which if you remember was that big swath on the eastern side of the West Bank. This is a large-scale closure, and you're seeing depopulation as we speak. Right now, you're seeing depopulation of Palestinian villages in the Jordan Valley and a massive expansion of agriculture. This is a lot of stuff that folks on the West Coast like to buy. These are sort of the natural products. These are a lot of organics, a lot of herbal sort of products are made in these settlements in the Jordan Valley. Oops, okay. And then finally Gaza, which is essentially an incarceration. It's the siege. It's basically a shutdown of any entrance or exit of people or goods, with the exception of one checkpoint that allows goods in and out of Gaza, which is closed at the whim of the Israelis. And unfortunately, the Egyptians are still maintaining the siege through Rafah. So I want to give you some quick examples of these different forms of occupation. This is a map of Hebron produced by B'Tselem, which is an Israeli human rights group. This is really the core of the old city of Hebron. And if you look carefully, the blue areas are these settlements that are being built right in the center of the city. And essentially, this is what I mean by a vertical occupation, is you have, on the market level, you have Palestinian shops, you have entrances to people's apartments, and this is essentially the old town and the old dwellings of Palestinians. Above it on the second story are Palestinian homes, and then you see this sort of makeshift barrier in between. And then Jewish settlements have actually been lifted by crane on top of these houses. So you actually see metal containers with Israeli flags flying off of them. These are containers that have been lifted on top of Palestinian homes. And then the military sets up 50 caliber machine gun emplacements on top of those settlements. And this, it's a little hard to see, but this is me looking up from the street level. You can see in the corner on the right there, there's a military emplacement. If you look very carefully towards the center, you can see the Israeli flags of the settlement. And then what happens is settlers will drill down from their settlements into the houses below. So if a Palestinian family leaves, for example, to go on vacation or to see family or something, the settlers will enter the house from above, lock it from the inside, throw all the goods of the Palestinian family on the street, and that becomes part of the settlement. This is a shopkeeper who has a map that was handed to him by the IDF telling him that his shop was going to be closed because the entire street was closed indefinitely. There was no explanation of why or when or for how long. This is really sort of the quintessential image of the occupation on the West Bank. This is the checkpoint. This is Hawara checkpoint, which has actually been more or less dismantled. But this is sort of what Palestinians encounter on a day-to-day basis. And for many Palestinians on the West Bank, this is the only interaction they have with Israelis. Thanks. It is this sort of this violent interaction with soldiers. And again, and I do mean violent. I've actually witnessed myself soldiers beating on kids, and yes, kids at checkpoints. And essentially the violence is meted out based on the mood and the whim of the soldiers there. And these soldiers are 17, 18, 19 years old. And certainly the soldiers are being put in a very awkward position, but some of them are more than happy to express their frustration on Palestinians. This is from Jerusalem. This is one of the houses in Sheikh Jarrah, which is a neighborhood that's being targeted by settlers right now. And this is a family who's been put out on the street. The kids have little posters they've put up asking for re-entry to their homes. And this is the home that they've been kicked out of. And you can see there's a security guard inside preventing Palestinians from going in. There's nobody living in this house, but settlers do go there to basically assert their ownership of the house. The West Bank then, for the most part, is marked by these systems of surveillance. As you can see here, this is an automated camera which is attached to an Israeli military base. So there's, even inside of Palestinian villages, you have this constant surveillance by the Israeli military from the outside. And this is an example of a sort of a varied settlement. It's an older settlement on the West Bank, which you can see the sort of oddly shaped building is the synagogue. There's red roofed houses which are legal under Israeli law. And then you have these sort of trailers that are on the side. These are illegal expansions. They're even considered illegal under Israeli law, not just international law. This is how settlements get expanded. I think I'm done, so that was pretty fast. Thank you guys very much.
كمان مرة صباح الخير. Okay, many people they understand Arabic. That's excellent. Okay, I'll do my presentation in Arabic. It's okay? First, I would like to thank the organizers. Really, it's amazing. Really, I appreciate that. And this is the second time for me in 2 months in Olympia. This is great. And really all the groups, all the organizations, and especially I call it Laila. And we have a co-sponsor, co-presenter, Laila. If you hear her, she's 2 years old around. She's co-presenter with me. It's part of the presentation. Anyway, my name is Ziad Abbas. I was born in the Hesha refugee camp, and I grew up in the Hesha refugee camp. And I'm struggling to return back to my village. My family uprooted from a village called Zakaria village, which right now the new name for the village called Kfar Zakharia. The moment that Nada spoke in the beginning, she said, I'm a refugee. And sometimes when we think about this word as refugee, what is the meaning of refugee? And sometimes I try to explain it to the people. It's not just a word where you can describe the people in a way or another to put them in a certain category, but psychologically, when you say that, I am a refugee, I feel I am less than the others. And this kind of feeling growing up inside you as refugee. And here with the story with refugees, I will take you back a little bit. I will not focus that much in history. But because Ran, he used nice maps, I decided to use very, very old map. And this map actually for Palestine, 1878. And usually I focus on this map because actually for the first settlement, I don't know if it's working, settlement here, colonial, by the Zionist movement, 1878. Even long time before 1948, even before the first Zionist conference in 1897. And here start the roots of the problem. It's not just the issue of Palestinian refugees. The roots of our problem is with Zionism. Zionism movement, Zionist ideology, etc. When they were started and they had the plan to build a homeland for the Jewish people. And they have all this propaganda after that, Palestine without people, for a people without land, using the Torah, promised land from God. The same it's happened in this country, the manifest destiny, right? And sometimes when you hear that, you think God will sit down with a laptop, he's like real estate agent, distributing land to these people, punishing other people, etc. And this is the way how it's used. And here when we speak about Palestinian refugees, actually going back to the history, my village called Zakaria, as I said, and here is my village, Zakaria, in 1929. I will be fast a little bit. This is some picture here, I got it from the Israeli archive for the Zionist movement, for the Zionist groups in 1948 when they occupied our villages in our area. This is Abjur village, and you can see actually some of the Zionist groups. This is Beit Natif, which now it's a huge settlement. It's called Beit Shemesh. And this picture actually, for the Zionist groups, they are relaxing and taking a break after they uprooted the people. For the people you can watch. One of the houses actually still exists until now. And part of the ethnic cleansing policy was used by the Zionist groups in that period. First, they uproot the people living in the villages. Second, they destroy the houses. And third, they plant trees. Just the way how they move with it. And until now, when you think about it, I know there is a campaign right now about JNF, where a lot of support coming from this country to plant trees and to build parks inside Israel. But the plan, it was even long time before, where it was part of the ethnic cleansing policy, where they destroyed the villages. At the same time, they planted trees, where the plan is to erase the history of the people. Some Palestinians arrested in 1948. This reminds me all the time with my mom. She was uprooted from her village. And this picture, actually, you find it in the book. And I recommend this book. It's called The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine for Ilan Babe. People, they were living very close to the coast. Jaffa, Haifa, all the towns in that area. They used the boats and they moved to Lebanon. Other people, they were arrested. They put them in jails. They transferred them. And here is the shock. Yesterday I was speaking with a friend of mine. He's an artist, and when he saw this picture, he told me this is exactly reflect the meaning for the catastrophe generation, the shock. Where people, they were farmers, connected to their land, connected to their plants, to the trees, to everything, and suddenly they became refugees. Until now, if you meet with anyone from the catastrophe generation, you will feel this kind of shock. You are shifting your life from a farmer to a refugee. This is like the 5 directions. 750,000 Palestinian refugees, they moved to 5 directions. Remember this map. Remember it very well, actually, the way how it is. Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, West Bank, and Gaza. We have 59 refugee camps, 19 refugee camps in West Bank, 8 refugee camps in Gaza, 750,000 uprooted in 1948. Right now, Palestinian refugees, we are over 7 million refugees. We are very active people. We produce children very fast, actually. This is like the history of the refugee camp. My refugee camp, the Haitian camp, 1948, part of the camp, 1956, and some of the rooms built by United Nations. By the way, each picture I can do a special class about each picture here, because the history behind in the refugee camp, and this is when we speak about 63 years for the Palestinian refugees, they are living in the refugee camps. The catastrophe generation, the schools, and here actually there is a professor, her name Maya Rosenfeld, Israeli scholar. She did her PhD about education in Palestine, comparing the education in Palestine and education in West Jerusalem. And she found out the high education in the refugee camps higher than West Jerusalem. And this is part of the culture. And it was very simple. When my mom, she was trying to push me that you should focus on school, because she understands that she has nothing to offer me except a certificate, no land, nothing except the life in the refugee camp. The United Nations rooms, I was personally born in one of these kind of rooms in 1964. The room was 81 square feet. And here you can see the water issue, actually. Reminds me of my mom my aunts when they carry the water in their head. And Ron, he spoke about the water issue. When we speak about apartheid system, water here play big role. For example, I feel I'm very privileged when I am here in the States since 2 years. For 2 reasons. First, because I can shower every morning. Second, because I can drive everywhere. And when I say I can shower every morning, yeah, because we used to shower 1 time a week because we don't have enough water. Just we receive, some of the last studies actually, recently, Palestinians received 11% of the water. Israelis, they receive 89%. And until now, and this is for us when you turn your face in the refugee camp, you will find the settlers, they have their own swimming pools, they are cleaning their cars, and they have enough water. Okay, move fast a little bit. The wall, the fence, my camp, I spent personally 10 years behind the fence in the Asia refugee camp between 1985 to 1995. And the wall we see right now in Palestine, it's not something new. This is the Israeli policy. Since 1948. Even sometimes we say we Palestinians, we live behind barriers and walls since 1948. But the other people, they can't see the barriers and the walls. Because military orders, it's another kind of walls. Curfew, it's another kind of walls. Bypass roads, it's another kind of walls. Settlements, another kind of walls, etc. Political prisoners, and here I will just throw quick facts. Political prisoners, it's one of the main issues in Palestine. And this is why I have an accent. Actually, I learned English inside jail. And we have right now 6,000 Palestinian political prisoners, among them 300 children. Actually, the average is 300 children below 18 years old. Sometimes you have 500 children inside jail. Among them, 40 women. Right now, in this moment, when we are speaking with you. And since 1967 until now, over 700,000 Palestinians experienced the Israeli jails, experienced the Israeli torture, etc. And we have 36 political prisoners. They spent in jail more than 25 years. So everyone knows Mandela, 27 years in jail. Nahel Barghouthi and another 3 prisoners, they started the year 33 in jail right now. More pictures. I want to move fast a little bit. This is my village right now. You saw the village before, but this is my village right now where some Israelis, they are living there. Of course, the support from Kansas, support to build national parks inside our village. You know this map very well. This is my mother village, and here you can read nature reserve. This village, it's only for the Israelis to have fresh air and to have barbecue in our destroyed villages. This is, you can move right now inside Palestine 1948. You'll find many, many areas where they have national parks, and just for the Israelis and the original people, the indigenous, they are living in refugee camps. Right of return, it's the key of the peace in the Middle East. No right of return, no peace in the Middle East. And this is the key, actually. Okay. The key, and this is sometime when we speak about the real peace and the real justice, the way how we see it, when the over 7 million Palestinians, they will be justified. I mean the right of return, to access right of return as a collective right and as individual right. At the same time, I will shift a little bit. I would like to speak about Gaza, but maybe later. We have other workshops. But here, when we spoke, I had some question for Sharif, actually, which I feel I need to answer. For us Palestinians, to be honest with you, we don't count in governments at all, the Arab world. We count on people. And imagine when I said in the beginning, remember this map, how the Palestinian refugees, they were leaving. They left in 1948 to Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, West Bank, and Gaza Strip. This is the way sometimes it comes to our mind. When the people start in popular way, in grassroots level, like what we saw in Tahrir, Liberation Square, or what we see right now in Yemen, when the people start moving. And what Israel will do if the Palestinian refugees, they decided just to march back, going back to Palestine. And Palestinian youth, the new generation, they are thinking about this. And it's one of the things like the people, they need to be prepared for it. BDS, it's very, very important too here. But we need to move from BDS as solidarity movement. We need to move for joint struggle and connect our struggle in this country with the rest of the other people's struggles, not just in Palestine, everywhere in the West Bank. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm going Muslim here, but this is peace work, so salam means peace. I would like to start with that. Ziad mentioned, my talk will not be as historical as Ziad, but I want to mention what the first colony, you referred to Petah Tikva. It was built in 1878. And, and I grew up hearing two names for the same place. So my dad would go, my mom was like, where's that? He's like, he went to Mlabbis. I'm like, okay, I had no idea where's that. And then we would be going to the same place and it says Petah Tikva in Hebrew. And my mom says, this is Mlabbis. It's like on the sign, it says Petah Tikva. So imagine, I grew up with confused as a child. Nobody told you history, but it's confused about the naming of these places. And the same applies for Izur, Yazur, Netanya, Khalid, Ilad, Rashrash, and the rest. But as Nada said, I'm a 48er, Palestinian from the inside, west of the wall, east of the Mediterranean, between Kalkilia and Tulkarem. You just name it in terms of what border you want to look at. Today in Israel, there are 20% of the population, Palestinians, were about 1.5 million, 14% of the general vote. And I'm going to be talking about 3 laws that came recently, and two of them were last month. 3 laws that were approved by the Israeli parliament. One of them called Nakba law, and then the community bill, and there's also the loyalty oath that also had taken place in last December. When we think about apartheid, they always think about Israel 2010, 2011, Lieberman, very right wing. Louder? Wين يعني أكثر من هيك? Okay, so they were talking about we're living in the Lieberman age, but actually, all these laws have been there before in some form or another, and now just legalized. So the Nakba law that was initiated, that was approved March 22nd, and I'm reading from the laws. So this is what it says. The Nakba law, officially titled Budget Principle Law Amendment 39, reducing budgetary support for activities contrary to the principle of the state. And this will enable a committee of bureaucrats from the Ministry of Finance to fine municipalities, public institutions, or publicly supported organizations if they believe that these bodies oppose the interpretation of the term Jewish and democratic state. And if they express any feeling of mourning related to the Israeli Independence Day or the Nakba, or violate the symbol of the state. So when Israel celebrates independence, and I choose to declare this day as a day of mourning, it's a criminal act. And any public event that relates to that is not going to be getting funding from the state, but it's a criminal act and there's going to be fines. So, memory out. The second thing is community bill, and this approving was of giving rights for communities who have 400 people. Communities, usually called them mushabim, which is a settlement, but a different inside Israel. And it gives them the right to discriminate or to choose which people they want to live with them. So if the community of the 400 people decide that they don't want to integrate people that don't fit their lifestyle, and this includes Arabs, gays, disabled people, Mizrahi Jews, then they can. So if I have enough money and I want to go live not in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, just in Abu Shab, near my hometown, I can't. And it's legal. So no housing and no land. The other one was actually, declared as like, okay, it's another Liberman won, Liberman won another battle, and it's called the Loyalty Oath Bill, and it's an amendment to citizenship law, and it says for now the citizenship law is like, okay, if you're not an Israeli citizen, you want to become an Israeli citizen, which means you're Jewish, then if you're not born there, it means like you declare that I'll be loyal citizen to the state of Israel. The new amendment says that you have to declare that you have every intention to follow the laws of the state, but also to declare allegiances to a Jewish state that is also democratic. So if you're not Jew, you have to declare allegiances to a Jewish state. And guess who's not Jewish, who's trying to get citizenship to Israel? So I'm like, okay, here goes my love life. But within that three settings of like no land, no memory, there was really like an escalation of home demolishing among, within the Palestinians and Israel. And so, okay, there's racial profiling, there's racism going on, like, differences in budgets and whatnot, but I think one of the largest calamity and like the struggle with Palestinians and Israel that has been in the last years was the struggle against home demolishing. And home demolishing has been, it's such a hard issue because there's not enough land and the community grew. And Israel hasn't built one single Palestinian city since its establishment. They're building now one in the Galilee called the Rawabi, and there's a whole debate about how much money they got, and the companies that are helping building. There was a Palestinian movement saying we support BDS. So the companies who are building this city are gonna not be using or having any business with settlers or companies that are in the occupied West Bank or Gaza or the Golan Heights. And the parliament, there was a letter by the parliament members who want to boycott these companies because they lost their Zionist soul to build a Palestinian city. But what I want to emphasize that two sides have been like really struggling with home demolishing. One of them is Lid, which is by Tel Aviv, Yafa, and it's one of the cities that fell during the Nakba, and Amal Eqeiq in Nakab. And Lid has in December 9th, I think I have the date here. I don't have the exact date, I think I have it, but it's in December. They demolished in one day seven houses. And they displaced 67 people who are still there. And the Abu Eqeiq family, and they put a tent and they said, "Welcome to Abu Eqeiq refugee camp." And the other one is, and now there is 100 houses in Lid alone who are under the threat of immediate demolition. And overall, in the whole community, there is 4,000 houses. The other one is Amal Eqeiq, is in Nakab, and in Amal Eqeiq we have about 80,000 Bedouins who live in the Nakab, and they have their own lifestyle with them. They live in communities or tents. And Amal Eqeiq was demolished 9 times. And in January, there was every time there's a big solidarity movement within young Palestinians who go there to help the families, and they go there and rebuild. And last time it was very violent. 16 people were shot and injured, was arrested. And what happens when the houses are demolished is who gets to get there? You have the people from the Israeli Land Administration, you get people from the Jewish National Fund, you get the police forces, and you get border patrol. So it's a very, very highly militarized operation. And one of the new laws or strategies now is you have two options. Either you demolish your own house, okay, or you don't do it, and then the Israelis come and they do it for you, but you still have to pay. And we're talking about the fees of $17,000, 60,000 shekels if you destroy your own house. If you want to aid for Israel to do it, fine, but you have to end up paying 120,000 shekels, which is like $34,000. And I think, there is this sense of not stagnation, of like frustration and anger and clamor among like many, because this is not, for people like, I don't care about Palestine, like you're ruining my house. You're demolishing my house, and it takes years and years. It's like it's like your life project to build a house for your kids. And I'm talking about, we don't have like public housing. We don't have like a system. There is like no cities. So where do you expect people to go? So there's a lot of like conscience recently among the people saying this is ethnic cleansing. Okay, this is ethnic cleansing, but it's just very slow paced. And there has been a lot of activism around that, whether it's in the legal system, like groups of Adala, like for legal rights for Palestine and Israel, Musawa, also for equal rights, Mada, academics, but also with the people, a lot of like young movement. And because the kids and the people are seeing them in front of their eyes, and like even if like for years they've not put the connection between being colonized or being oppressed or whatever in national or ideological terms, this is concrete. This is something that you live and you see. In my hometown, they demolished 2 houses of families, the Ashkar family, and then in retaliation there was a strike, and then confrontation with the police, and they burned down the post office to the symbol of the state. But it's about service, and then people end up going to the nearby Jewish town or the settlement to get to the post office. But it was a lot of, when I was home last summer, there was a lot of public debate about what do you do? Should you build illegally? Like what does it mean illegally? Because we're talking about, you get permits, and to get a permit to build is about $10,000. To get a land, like the average is like $70,000 to $800, $100,000. So like it's a lot of money, and we're talking about a community that's already marginalized economically. So it's stagnation, it's oppression, it's marginalization, like all of the above. And I think the good news, I feel if there's anything good that's going to come out of that there's a really, really strong resistance to this. I think there's a strong resistance, and I want to show a clip that was made about, I see a resistance within the cultural movement. I'm going to show 2 clips. One of them is hip hop by DAM. It's a group from LED, and who did actually a clip about that in 2003. And I'm talking about like the demolition of the houses in Lid happened last month, but like in 2003, they already knew what's happening there. And I want to say a few words that this video clip was shot and directed by Julian Omar Khamis, who was murdered last week. He was this, one of the co-founders of the Freedom Theater in Geneva, and this is, I feel also like my tribute to him. And the second clip we're going to see, it's just something came out, I think, 2 weeks ago by a group who called themselves Dawlat al-Dhahika, the funny state, because they just got so ironic of like making fun of all these laws, and it also has something about home demolishing. I'll be happy to answer any questions, but since we're talking about human rights, I feel this is one of the key issues that stand out. Of no land, you can't remember because it's illegal. And you can't marry anyone. If they marry, you have to be, nobody can be a citizen unless they're Jewish, or unless you identify with yourself with the Jewish state. So it's this thing, I think, of when we call Palestinians inside Israel, like 48ers or citizens, is like, are we, like, really, what's going on there? So I think we're gonna, can you see the clip? Okay.
זו יונת צייד, הטרף הוא עוד בית של יונה המנסה לשרוד תחת שלטון העית. בוא נעשה משהו אופטימי יותר, אני כל יום אני מתעורר, או איזה 1000 שוטר, אולי הם באו לעצור סוחר, או לא, הם באו להרוס את הבית שלה, שכן שלו, מה קורה פה? בוא המצינה סובבת את הגטו, למה קשה לו, למי יענה לו, לאן ואיפה שאלך תירוצים מקבלים את פניי. עברתי על החוק, לא החוק עבר עליי, די, רבותיי, כאן נולדתי, כאן נולדו גם סבותיי, לא כתוב שלי, אני מנסה לבנות בית ומה שנבנה לי נפצע הדורם מאור שימצא במקום שבו מלא אנשים עם הבטחות שיעברו את האור שבקצה המנהרה אבל זה רק לחקור עוד רכבת דריסה לא, בשיר הזה אין צנזורה, יש גדר ביוב מסילה, קרא לזה ארכיטקטורה ותוסיף לי זה פלפל בצבע לבן ומה שיטטש ממנו הוא אקדח שניתן בכל הדברים שאמרתי רק נהיה להם חול ויש את האנשים שעומדים בתור שיש להם חיוך בחיוך וחיוך בסיבוך כל עוד הסיבוך בא אבל תדע שזה חבר סבוך מדי זה לא גזענות, זאת ציונות די זה לא בורות, זה רק התחפרות בבורות בית הרוס ובגינה 8 מסילות ובנים מוגלות לפחות 200 רכבות מאחורי החורבה גדר הפרדה שאמור להיות בין הבית למסילה זה נמצא בין שביל לבין ניר צבי
Thank you very much for an excellent panel, and since all of the panelists have kept to their time without me having to ask them at all, we actually have ample time for discussions, and I'm going to ask people to form a line like they did earlier because that worked, but also if for some reason you can't get to the center, please by all means show us, make a sign so that we can actually get you a mic to you. So what I wanted, since we do have a little time, I just wanted to possibly for a minute, I think, say that to me this panel came together really, really nicely in that we saw an analysis of the stratification of colonization from the initial vision of the colonial Zionist mindset, which saw this land and decided, okay, we're going to colonize. And so Ron's the discussion of the vertical and the lateral, I mean, the levels, the stratification of colonization. And then beyond that, there's also the psychological aspect of colonization that criminalizes memory, so that we're not even allowed to remember the names, so that there's a superimposition of the colonial vision that actually erases so much as the name, and those of us who are born there. But the thing is, it has not succeeded. The internal psychological colonization has not succeeded because every single one of us knows the name that existed before the superimposed colonial map came over. So that someone like me, who is a refugee who was not born in Palestine, who only visited once for the first time 5 years ago, I still know where I'm from. So for colonization to succeed, it would have to actually criminalize memory to the point where we actually forget. And we have not forgotten where we're from, and we do claim our rights. And since this is a topic about human rights, so we claim our rights, and that to me is a very positive thing, because ignore your rights and they will go away, but we're not ignoring our rights. So with that, I'd like to open the floor to a discussion of the topics and also human rights and strategies. And as I said, well, we already have a line with a mic, so we're going to do that. And as I said, we're going to, if there are people in the audience who don't want to form the line, please let me know, and I'll call on you also.
Thank you for a great panel. My question is about criminalization of solidarity, and a law that was not mentioned that is being currently, I think, in a second stage of approval in the Israeli Knesset, that will fine any person holding an Israeli citizenship who supports BDS, as well as would actually give the government license to turn away any member of the international community that goes to Palestine or Israel and has any association with BDS. So my question is twofold. How do we organize? And my sense is that the only way to defeat it is to get their en masse to the point that they will not be able to administer everything. The fine is hefty, is close to $80,000 American dollars, 300,000 Israeli shekels. There is resistance to this from Israeli citizens, Palestinian and Jewish alike. Is there any way to portray this criminalization as a violation of human rights, free speech, etc., both in Israel and in the international community? How do we organize against it in a way that is effective and does not undermine the solidarity work that is being done? Both, it will prevent people that have connections in Palestine from signing on to BDS in the US, in Europe, in Canada, in Australia, and then it definitely undermines the calls for solidarity from inside Israel. So.
Can I answer that from my second class citizenship position? I think I heard about the law, and I think it's targeting citizenship, targeting people who are, and they know that a lot of Palestinians inside Israel, especially with the legal advocacy groups and the Palestinian intelligentsia who became involved in PDS. So I think in a way to undermine their work, it became under the umbrella of any citizen. And there was a whole discussion in Israeli academia about boycotting, and especially with Ben Gurion University and revoking a professorship from professors, or just limiting their status. The other side, so I think it's not, the intention of this law is to say that it's for everybody, and if we can revoke a citizenship of an Israeli, we can do that, a Jewish Israeli, then by all means we can do it for the rest. And this echoes with Azmi Bishara, what happened with Azmi Bishara, and Hanin Zuabi, and his participation in the Marmara ship. The other side of it, I think, Israel has gone very right-wing recently. There's an investigation of the left, and it's witch hunting, I think, and that what took people to the street a few weeks ago in Tel Aviv, and in the inspiration of if it happened in Tahrir Square, we can do it too here, and people went into the street reclaiming, political power and saying, we're being hunted. And whatever is left of the left in Israel is struggling. But the question here, I think there is targeting solidarity, targeting people, because there are more people who are doing work with Zakhrot, or people who are protesting in Bil'ain, and I'm talking about young Israeli youth, and it is this kind of radical left, or post-Zionist, or whatever you want to call it. And it is going to really actually materialize to revoking citizenship to that specific group of people. I don't know, but I think it's very scary. And I think the whole creating, making people paranoid about even talking about, mentioning Nakba, mentioning PDS. What internationals think about it, Israel is still seen as the only democracy in the Middle East. And, coming from the only democracy in the world, that's a big, it's a big support. So that's my take on it.
Well, I'm not a panelist, but I'd like to address that in the sense of the criminalization of BDS, because this is a conference about BDS, and it's really important to know what the legalities of BDS are. And I'm not going to address the criminalization of BDS within Israel, because that is within Israel. The call for BDS that came out was a call for global solidarity. We are, those of us who can engage in BDS outside of Israel should continue to do so. The call for the criminalization of BDS is extremely chilling, intimidating. It is actually a scare tactic. However, we do know that legally we have the right to engage in BDS. The National Lawyers Guild has issued a statement looking at the very fine points of the criminalization of BDS, and it does not apply, because the way the call came out of Israel, out of Palestine, it came out of Palestinian civilian societies, not a government, and that's a very important distinction, because there is within the US, there is a precedent of the US saying, people cannot respond to a call from a foreign government for boycott. And that historical precedent came during the OPEC war in the 70s, OPEC war, during the oil crisis during the 70s, when Arab governments actually called for a boycott of Israel, and the US said, no, you cannot respond to the call for a government, a call from a government for a boycott of a country that the US is not boycotting. So it was very much at an international government level. Anyone who seeks to criminalize our activism does not understand the law. We are not responding to the call from a government, we are responding to the call from a people, a civilian people. Not only did that call come from the Palestinian people rather than the Palestinian government, but the call is also coming out from someone like me, and I'm a US citizen. I am one of those Palestinian refugees who are part and parcel of the call, the Palestinian call for BDS. And anyone who responds to my call is responding to the call of a US citizen for BDS. So the criminalization, as I said, the criminalization of BDS is something that may apply to Israeli citizens. And yes, they have it hard. And ideally, BDS will reach its goal, and we will know everything that came as the criminalization of BDS will hopefully disappear along with its consequences. But the criminalization of BDS activism does not impact those of us who are not Israeli, and the call is for global solidarity, and we can keep on engaging in it and within our legal rights.
I'd like to say something very quick as an American activist as well. The biggest threat of this law is that we'll actually lose one of the privileges that no Palestinians have, which is the free entry and exit through Tel Aviv. So I think that the stakes for us are actually quite low, in the sense of, yes, we may be turned back at Tel Aviv, but there's so many Palestinians who never even have the opportunity to come close to Tel Aviv that I think it's certainly worth the effort. And I think one of the things that's important to do is, yes, we should understand the risks of our work, but when you engage in international activism, you're engaging in questions of privilege, and I think it's certainly, as a Jewish American, it's a price I'm willing to pay, never to enter Israel again if I have to, because really, what a small price to pay for the kind of work we're trying to do.
So in a country like Israel, in theory, in democracy, the people are in control of the laws, which laws are in place, which senators are in place, who's in the Knesset, etc. And just recently, actually, last night, I found for the first time an organization that is committed to representing the Arab minority in Israel, called Adalah. And I've never heard of something like this before. I've been looking for one. I don't have many resources, so I wanted to ask the panel. Coming from Israel and Palestine, if you know of more organizations, you mentioned something called the National Legal...
National Lawyers Guild, that's a US organization.
Oh, it is. What else, what other kind of work is coming out of there to actually work on changing Israeli law and fixing these problems?
I think, like the rest of Palestine, we have an NGO boom. There's, a lot of NGOs that working, but Adalah and Musawa is the main two groups, and there is Badid and Hawakir. I really can't keep track of them. And it's important to know that these groups developed like maybe more late 90s, like early 90s. The first one probably was MEDA. It was for social sciences, applied social sciences. And we're talking about a group of the new Palestinian intelligentsia, people who went to Israeli schools or overseas, got their PhDs, and they came back and realized the significance of, we're a minority, but using a civil framework to fight for minority rights. Their work is not always easy, and there's also a lot of Muslim information, like women groups, like Siwan and Women Against Violence and queer movement also. They're doing, and most of them are placed in Haifa, located in Haifa. So Haifa is like our new, I don't know, it is our new center. Their work is not easy, and I think because they know the ins and outs of laws, and they know they're doing things within the framework of not a political party, but an organization. They have lawyers, they have, they're well-staffed, they have connection with the outside world. But I think they're under heavy scrutiny from the state. They don't get enough money, they're monitored. And if we know like what happened with Emir Makhul, who's in jail now, it was part of, so it's a kind of like a dangerous work to do. Okay, Emir Makhul, he's in prison now, and he was, for years, in and out. He's a well-respected figure. He's not a political party. He was doing things with, I think, was it? Not Badil, I forgot the name of.
Coordinating committee of the.
Yeah. He was in Ihtijaj. Ihtijaj was this big organization, NGO, that puts underneath all the Palestinian NGOs inside Israel, and giving resources. And that's the kind of thing that was too much for the state to take. Okay? Because you're a citizen, you are in touch with all the Palestinians overseas, you meet all these Arabs, you have connection with the EU, you go there and you ask for the protection of the EU for the rights of Palestinian Israel. So that was too much of undermining the sovereignty of the state. So eventually they said something about him being involved in meeting some kind of suspicious figure, and it, in a way, it was really cracking down on the Palestinian intelligence and the people who are doing this kind of work. Adala, I think they're strong because they're well staffed and well respected lawyers, and I think Hassan Jabari is married to Jewish woman, makes his life easier. Seriously. So it just this kind of internal politics. But they have contributed tremendously to really increasing political awareness, making people aware. And today, I'm involved from distance with Hawakir. It's a new organization to help women do work and farmers, and they get money from U.S. aid to help projects in the Negev, Bedouins, and also in the north. And it just people do what they can do, because it becomes we're not going to get anything from the state. So we're going to use civil society and our skills to promote whatever we can, knowing that it's not enough, and knowing that there's a lot of risk involved in that too.
Hi. First of all, I want to say my best wishes for Ziad for every morning shower, because you and I, we suffer. I'm from Gaza and I suffer from this problem. I feel so lucky here in Poland and Washington. But I have one question and one comment. My question is for Amal. Can you express or talk briefly about the loyalty law in Israel, which now I know, or the last statistics said that 10,000 of Palestinians in Jerusalem and 1948 occupied Palestine, the Israeli will take their IDs. And I know now 14,000 of Palestinian children under 5, after 5 age, they will lose their ID. And can you imagine that there is a Palestinian without name? He cannot go to school. If he want to go to the hospital, they cannot accept him because he don't have ID. And nobody is nobody above the rule, because the Israelis now. I hear about Hanin Zoabi and Muhammad Barak and Ahmad Tibi. Hanin Zoabi, when she's one of the Knesset member, and when she joined the Palestinian flotilla, now they're talking about take off her ID, or the Israeli citizen. Even she's a Palestinian, and she represented the Palestinian in Knesset, which is the legislative center. And my comment for Ziad, when you talk about the new generation, I'll give you a story. My mom, she's from Yafa. We are from Yafa. And her mother, my mom is the youngest in her family, and her mother gave her the key, the home key. And now, before I came here, I told her, because I'm the oldest one in my family, and I told her, why you shouldn't give me the key? She told me, no, you can go to States and you can stay whatever you want. I'll give the key for your youngest sister. Did you get the idea?
I got it.
Thank you.
I understand, yeah, the same actually, this is the issue. Sorry, I will go from the end. With the key, it became a symbolic for Palestinian refugees. The same, if you ask many Palestinians anywhere, they still have the keys. Me personally, I have the key with me here in the state, but I haven't. I don't show it to the people like, it's something simple. For me, it doesn't make sense, I keep it here. And this is the issue like with the Ben Gurion in 1948 when they asked Ben Gurion if he will be worried that one day the Palestinian refugees, maybe they will try to return back to Palestine. And Ben Gurion said in that period, in 1948, he said the catastrophe generation will die and the new generation will forget. And here we are, 63 years, and the new generation actually, they are committed for right of return in the way that they don't see any future for them without accessing the key they inherited from their families. And this is generation by generation, and not just because we are the Palestinian people, we are unique. We are not different from any other people, like the same, they were living under oppression. We are not different from the South African. They are living in the townships, which we still have people that are living in the townships. In South Africa, they are struggling for right of return. And we are not different from the other people. They are living in New Orleans, actually, right now. They are struggling for right of return. Even New Orleans in the United States. The same with the native, like the Native American, the Native Indian here in this country. So the idea is to believe in the right. And when I said in the beginning, I feel I am less than the others, not because I am a refugee and I am dependent on the United Nations. No, I am standing here in front of you. I am very proud who I am as a Palestinian refugee. But the idea here, because you can't access your right, and you look around you and you see someone because his eyes and the color, his color or his religion, he can use your house, he can use your water, he can use everything that belongs to you, and you are not allowed. And I visited Olympia last 2 months, twice, but Jerusalem is just 8 miles from my refugee camp since 2000 actually. I visited Jerusalem only 3 times until now. Yeah, absolutely. The issue here is the belief in the right. And here just I will have one comment concerning the laws. What's happening right now, and I'm sure Amal, she will explain that. But what's happening with Israel, it's clear with history. When fascism feel under threat, they escalate. And Israel right now, the fascism in Israel, it's coming up escalation, more rules, more laws, more, because they feel threatened and they feel isolated. They build the wall to isolate the Palestinians, but they find themselves isolated actually. And BDS and the people, and this part of the world, it's part of this isolation.
I don't know so much about Jerusalem, so maybe Ron, you can talk more about what's happening there. But I just want to say, with Jerusalem, it's the situation of Jerusalem ID, of like where you live. So like they're not citizens. People in East Jerusalem are not considered citizens of Israel. They're just called residents. And they're entitled to some kind of services, and they get the how we use that, you know. Okay. And I think what is happening here with the loyalty, it has to do with Israel become basically paranoid with democratic threat. It's like, you know, they're outnumbering us. In a few years, we're going to be similar. So one way was just to filter that, and then it's like, oh, you know, all these people who are talking bad about Israel, just like silence them, and make allegiances to this Jewish democratic state, by also filtering who's, creating a new category of who should be a citizen and who shouldn't. Now, and I want to relate this to the restriction that has been made about marrying a non-Israeli, a non-Jewish. And that also like falls under the rubric of the loyalty law. So I can't, okay, I'm a Palestinian citizen, okay, regardless of like what status. I have Israeli citizenship. If I marry somebody, a Palestinian from diaspora or an Arab from Yemen or whatever, we cannot live in Israel. Okay? Now, if I give birth in Israel, my kids will be recognized as Israelis, okay? But as a family, we cannot live. Now, two of my cousins are married to one from a woman from Nablus and one from a woman from Ramallah, and when their women went to have birth in the hospital, they had to pay because they're not citizens. Okay, and then their kids are not getting Hawiyah. Okay, because it goes by, if you know, it's by the, it's the maternal law, so it's by the mom. So all these like, you know, specificities of who's, it's not about like where you're born, but like whom you're born to and who are your parents. And this is where the ethnicity part falls in.
Just very, very quickly, in terms of Jerusalemites in general, Jerusalem is very, very problematic for the Israeli state because in 1967 the Israelis formally annexed Jerusalem, and so what that does is that gave this very strange citizenship to Palestinian Jerusalemites, who actually have a bit more freedom of mobility than West Bankers, for example, people who they don't have citizenship but they have a West Bank ID. And so what's been happening really consistently since 1967 is greater and greater pressure to push Palestinians out of Jerusalem. And this is done legally, this is done through home demolitions, and this is done through settlement expansion. And what you're seeing now, there are two major Palestinian villages that remain around Jerusalem. They're Silwan and they're Sheikh Jarrah. And these are the last two Palestinian neighborhoods that connect Jerusalem to the rest of the West Bank. And so there's this massive push, both by settlers and by the state, to depopulate these villages as a way of isolating Jerusalem entirely from the West Bank, as a way of dividing it from the West Bank. And one of the things that I think is really important to remember is Jerusalem is the West Bank. It is 1967 territory. It was taken, particularly East Jerusalem, was taken at the same time as the rest of the West Bank. But this is part of the erasure of memory that Israel wants to pretend that Jerusalem will be the undivided city, as our current president mentioned, the wholly undivided Jewish city, which is a complete fabrication and really an ignorance of the history of the region.
Is that on? Oh, it is. Thank you for sharing your knowledge today. I really appreciate it. I'm in a state of learning about media's movement and connecting it to the struggles that I've been engaged in. And so I come with a comment and a question about solidarity, which is really important. A lot of people mention it. And like concretely, the way I have, understood solidarity is like through hip hop or the things that I do, or connecting it, especially in regards to displacement and really understanding. And that's why it first came to really, I came to understand the BDS movement is through through gentrification and displacement and all those things, and I connected that struggle. And so my question is like, I'm interested in creating movement and making solidarity work. And so I was wondering, what are some successful and unsuccessful moments of solidarity work that you guys have engaged in as activists? And what should people do to increase solidarity work, as we try to make BDS movement? That's all.
That's like the hugest question ever.
I will try to answer a little bit, because I know we need another 2 conferences. Thank you. Thank you for the question. Actually, just the way how I see solidarity, I'm a Palestinian refugee, and sometimes, because Palestine now it's like the market, the fashion, or sometimes, excuse my language, it's the sexy issue, where people, they would like to be connected to Palestine, travel to Palestine, go to the wall, write their names, take photos near the wall, all this kind of stuff. I'm not minimizing the legal rules, by the way. But here we speak about which kind of connection we have with Palestinian. How we identify ourselves, where we are standing with the Palestinian struggle, from the Palestinian struggle. Are we friends with Palestinians? Just I see, when I watch the news, just I feel angry and I need to do something for the Palestinian. or I am in solidarity with Palestinians. I can do certain kind of struggle, certain kind of commitment, certain kind of occasional struggle when I say solidarity, or I am enjoying the struggle with Palestinians. Because here we need to be very careful. Hey guys, maybe I'm wrong, but this is the way how I see it. So I see solidarity, it's part of the joint struggle, but it's not joint struggle. And if I want to compare that with what happened with South Africa, when here in the community here, the way how they were connected, where students movement, churches, communities, neighborhoods, everywhere, they were like connected with each other, and they were doing the boycott campaign against the apartheid system in South Africa. But right now, when it's come to the Palestinian, right now, like I see certain people, they are standing on the level where they are friends with Palestinian. They react according something happened in Palestine, so they take a stand and they move like one step toward Palestine. Like for example, when during the attack on Gaza 2 years ago, 2 years and a half ago, how the people they were in the streets everywhere. It was amazing. It was good. It was excellent. But after that, the people they go a few steps back, relax. This is like I can say it. This is the way how the people they react in general. Second, in solidarity, where you have certain kind of groups, and they find that they identify themselves, they are in solidarity with Palestinian, where they try to be connected with other groups in Palestine, follow the calls coming from Palestine. And to be honest here, we need to be very careful, because Palestinian right now, we are fragmented. Sometimes it's really very hard to reconnect. And I like the idea where when you are in solidarity with Palestinian, no matter, you don't need to be part of the fragmentation. You focus on the Palestinian political right. It's very clear. You don't need to go with the details here and here. You focus with the Palestinian political rights, the right of return, and the call from the BDS, like all the organizations in Palestine, it was very clear on right of return, You have the whole schedule, it's very clear for you. And we need to be very careful with this, the fragmentation on the ground. The third thing, it's the joint struggle. And joint struggle for me, it's the way how I see it. Like when I say I'm a refugee, I connect my struggle with the refugees in New Orleans. And we connect the struggle with each other. I connect my struggle like for the community here in the United States, especially I can say after the cut on the education and the budget of education. I feel when you struggle for the education rights, instead to cut in the budget, when you say we don't want to support Israel with the $3 billion, we need to use the $3 billion for the education here, it's a joint struggle, you connect that. And be sure, the moment you stop the $3 billion to Israel, we will be okay in Palestine. It will impact us and it will affect us, and it's connected with each other. I feel I am connected with the marginalized communities here in the United States of America, with the Native American, with the African American, with the Latino, with the immigration rights. This is where we come together and connected, because sometimes if I want to we want to have a campaign against the Apache helicopters. It's okay, it's good. But this is a circle, it's a package. And people sometimes, it's okay, you can start as a friends, you can come down to the solidarity. From solidarity, you can go down to the joint struggle. Because here, what we need right now, BDS, I hope, it will build a community. BDS needs a community. It's not just something like in order to have a very successful BDS campaign, we need to build the BDS community. Come as a community and focus on issues here in your neighborhood, at the same time connected with Palestine or South Africa or Latin America or anywhere.
This is going to be our last question. It was the hugest question of the panel, and I'm going to give everyone a chance to respond, and then this is going to be our last question, and because lunch break is at 12:15, and we're there.
So just very quickly as an answer to your question, I think in Olympia you've had amazing wins in terms of boycott. And certainly the Olympia Food Co-op with their decision to support the boycott should be very, very proud of yourselves. It's a huge win. And the Evergreen students as well voting to support divestment. These are huge steps. And I regret in Seattle we haven't been able to mimic those successes. That said, I wanted to put in a very quick plug. Next week is the Association of American Geographers Conference in Seattle, and geographers in general have opposed any discussion of boycott, and we're hosting 2 panels on boycott, and we're demanding it be brought into the public, and I would encourage anyone to come. There is officially a payment to enter, but I don't think you're going to have to. So just come to the panels and show your support at the Washington State Convention Center on Tuesday afternoon, starting at 2. We'd love to have you guys there because this is something we can do through our professional organizations, through our careers, through our jobs, is making this something, when people try to shut us down, we demand to speak about it and we demand to be honest about it. Thank you guys.
I'm going to talk about the successful moments of solidarity. Rachel Corey, and I think, despite the tragic, end. And I think when people think of, if you're in a dire situation, you don't want just the rhetorics, you just want something actual that, what the other people out there are going to do actually to help you. And for me, solidarity means fighting with, not fighting for. Because the people are capable of fighting themselves, and just, solidarity is somebody who stands next to you and help you. With a lot of what happened in the Arab world recently, with, Facebook became the space, or like Twitter or whatever, to just show your solidarity. Play the song, you put the last post about what's happening, and I got an email when they cut the internet in Egypt, and somebody, her name is Amal Eqeiq, she's a really brilliant artist, and she said she made this tree, and she said the tree said, Egypt is cut from the internet, but not from the people, and people just be pouring, and then when they had it back, we were translating Twitters, with people putting stuff in Twitter and just getting it out there. So I felt like that was my very, very modest moment of solidarity with the Egyptians, okay? I cannot speak for any Egyptian of what they want to do, but if they want their word to be out there and I can do whatever skill I have, I'll do it. And, for Palestinians, we don't know people in the United States government, okay? But yes, you can sign petition, you can write letters to your Congress, it really translates into action. Or you can come and protest with us in Palestine and be, human shield. You can just, support us. And was it the film Palestinian Blues that showed that? Or the film about Palestine and international activism? Palestine Habibti? Yeah, I think. So this is the moment of, yes, you just go there. Okay, and ask the people, always ask, how can I help? Thank you.
So I'm going to plug all of the workshops in the program. Just look at the programs here, the workshop description, and go there, depending, based on your interests, your skills, but this is Solidarity in Action, and there are workshops starting this afternoon where you can find what you can do best and learn more about it. Thank you very much.